The bright, colorful chaos of Mrs. Abigail's kindergarten class was in full swing. Finger paints adorned tiny hands, construction paper littered the floor like confetti, and the air buzzed with the excited chatter of 5-year-olds eager to start their day. Morning routine was usually a well-oiled machine, backpacks stowed, names tagged on the attendance chart, and shoes securely fastened, ready for the day's adventures. Except, this morning, the machine had sputtered to a halt, all thanks to young Timmy. Timmy was, generally speaking, a model student. He was attentive during story time, shared his crayons without prompting, and even remembered to say please and thank you more often than not. That's what made this sudden, stubborn refusal so perplexing. For the past week, the simple act of putting on his shoes had transformed into a daily battle of wills. He'd arrive at school bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, eager to dive into the day's activities. But the moment Mrs. Abigail gently reminded him about his shoes, a dark cloud would descend. His lower lip would tremble, his eyes would well up with tears, and he'd plant himself firmly on the rug, a small, unmoving object of defiance. His shoes, a pair of perfectly ordinary blue sneakers with Velcro straps, sat innocently beside him. They weren't too tight, too old, or obviously uncomfortable. Mrs. Abigail had checked multiple times that in fact, Timmy had worn them happily for months. This sudden aversion was a complete mystery, and it was starting to disrupt the entire class. The other children, naturally curious, would gather around, their own shoelace tying momentarily forgotten. The gentle hum of morning activity would be replaced by a chorus of whispered questions and concerned glances. Mrs. Abigail sighed inwardly. She knew she needed to address this quickly, before it escalated further. That it wasn't just about the shoes. It was about understanding Timmy's feelings and helping him navigate whatever was causing this unexpected resistance. She crouched down, her eyes level with his, and offered a reassuring smile. "Timmy," she said softly, "can you tell me why you don't want to put on your shoes today?" "Timmy," Mrs. Abigail continued, her voice a soothing balm against the morning's minor chaos. "Are your shoes feeling a little sleepy today? Maybe they need a little wake-up call, like this." She tickled the side of one of his sneakers, making a silly tickle-tickle sound. Timmy remained unmoved, his gaze fixed on a distant corner of the room. Undeterred, Mrs. Abigail pulled out her secret weapon. The reward chart. It was a brightly colored poster adorned with stars, each star representing a positive behavior. "Remember, Timmy," she said, pointing to an empty space next to his name. "If you put on your shoes, you get a super shiny gold star. And when you get 5 stars, you get to pick a prize from the treasure chest." The treasure chest, filled with stickers, erasers, and tiny trinkets, was usually enough to motivate even the most reluctant student, but not today. "Maybe," Mrs. Abigail suggested, her mind racing for solutions, "your shoes are lonely. Maybe they want to go on an adventure. We're going to the playground later, and your shoes would love to swing on the swings and slide down the slide." She picked up one of the sneakers and made it talk, in a high-pitched, cartoonish voice. "Oh, Timmy, please take me to the playground. I want to have fun." When playful encouragement failed, Mrs. Abigail switched to gentle persuasion. She reminded Timmy of the fun activities planned for the day: painting, building with blocks, and reading a new dinosaur book. "We can't do all those fun things without our shoes, Timmy," she explained patiently. "We need our shoes to protect our feet so we can run and jump and play." She emphasized the importance of being responsible and following the classroom rules. She even tried a bit of reverse psychology. "Well, Timmy," she said with a slight shrug, "if you really don't want to wear your shoes, I guess you can just sit here on the rug. But you'll miss out on all the fun. It's your choice." She gave him a gentle smile and turned her attention to the other children, hoping he would reconsider. But Timmy remained rooted to the spot, his little face a mask of quiet defiance. Mrs. Abigail watched him carefully, her initial attempts at coaxing clearly ineffective. She knew she had to dig deeper to understand what was truly behind this sudden and persistent refusal. This wasn't just a simple case of stubbornness. Something else was going on. She just needed to figure out what. The morning wore on, and Timmy's resistance only intensified. What started as a quiet refusal had morphed into a full-blown meltdown. Now, tears streamed down his face, his small body racked with sobs. He clung to the rug as if it were a life raft, his knuckles white. The other children, initially curious, were now visibly distressed by Timmy's outburst. The happy hum of the kindergarten classroom had been replaced by an atmosphere of tension and unease. "Timmy, please," Mrs. Abigail pleaded, her voice laced with a growing sense of desperation. "We need to get ready for circle time. The alphabet train is waiting for us." But her words seemed to bounce off an invisible wall. Timmy just cried harder, his small voice repeating, "No shoes, no shoes." The disruption was becoming increasingly difficult to manage. The planned activities were falling by the wayside, as Mrs. Abigail was forced to devote all her attention to Timmy. The other children, restless and bored, started to act out, their pent-up energy spilling over into minor squabbles and unfocused wandering. And Mrs. Abigail felt a knot of frustration tightening in her stomach. She prided herself on her ability to create a calm and nurturing learning environment, but Timmy's persistent refusal was throwing everything off balance. She glanced at the clock, her anxiety growing with each passing minute. The principal, Mrs. Davison, was scheduled to observe her class later that morning, and the thought of explaining this chaotic situation filled her with dread. The pressure from the school administration was already mounting. Mrs. Davison had subtly hinted that she needed to address Timmy's behavior promptly, suggesting that consistent discipline was key to Mrs. Abigail bristled at the implication. She knew that Timmy wasn't simply being disobedient. Something deeper was at play. But she also knew that she needed to find a solution, and fast, before the situation spiraled further out of control. She tried a new approach, lowering her voice and speaking with a quiet intensity. "Timmy," she said, gently stroking his hair, "I'm worried about you that I want to help you, but I can't help you if you don't tell me what's wrong." She paused, waiting for a response. Timmy's sobs gradually subsided, but he remained silent, his eyes fixed on the floor. Mrs. Abigail sighed inwardly. She felt like she was running out of options. She was torn between her desire to be empathetic and understanding and the need to maintain order in the classroom. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her, making her feel increasingly overwhelmed. She knew she needed to find a way to help Timmy, not just for his sake, but for the sake of the entire class. Desperate for answers, Mrs. Abigail reached out to Timmy's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson. Her initial phone calls and emails were met with polite, but ultimately unhelpful responses. They acknowledged that Timmy had been a little clingy lately, but attributed it to a phase, perhaps a touch of separation anxiety after the long weekend. "He's probably just testing his boundaries," Mr. Johnson had said with a chuckle during their brief phone conversation. "Kids go through these things, you know. He'll snap out of it." Mrs. Johnson echoed this sentiment in her email, adding that Timmy had always been a bit sensitive, but nothing that warranted serious concern. Mrs. Abigail tried to explain the extent of the problem, emphasizing the daily meltdowns and the disruption to the classroom. She shared her concerns that there might be something more than just a passing phase at play. But her attempts to convey the gravity of the situation were met with a gentle dismissal. "We appreciate your concern, Mrs. Abigail," Mrs. Johnson wrote in a follow-up email, "but we really think he's just seeking attention. That we'll talk to him about it at home, but we're confident he'll be back to his old self in no time." Mrs. Abigail felt a wave of frustration wash over her. She understood that parents knew their children best, but she also trusted her own observations and instincts. She had seen countless children pass through her classroom, and she had a keen sense for when something was truly amiss. Timmy's behavior felt different, more profound than a simple attention-seeking tactic. She even suggested a brief meeting to discuss the issue in more detail, but the Johnsons politely declined, citing busy work schedules and other commitments. Mrs. Abigail felt increasingly isolated, caught between the pressure from the school administration and the dismissive attitude of Timmy's parents. She knew she couldn't give up. Timmy needed her, and she was determined to find a way to help him, even if it meant navigating this situation on her own. She decided to trust her instincts and delve deeper into the possible reasons behind Timmy's refusal, starting with a little research and a renewed focus on observing his behavior in the classroom. Perhaps, she thought, the answer was hidden in plain sight, waiting to be discovered. That evening, after a long and emotionally draining day, Mrs. Abigail sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by textbooks and research articles. She felt a flicker of hope as she remembered a professional development workshop she had attended the previous year, a session focused on sensory processing issues in young children. The presenter, a specialist in early childhood development, had discussed how some children experience the world in a different way. Their senses heightened or diminished, leading to unexpected behaviors and emotional responses. The workshop had covered a range of sensory sensitivities, from tactile defensiveness, an aversion to certain textures, to auditory sensitivities, discomfort with loud noises, and even sensitivities to light and smells at the time. Mrs. Abigail had found the information interesting, but hadn't encountered any students who exhibited those specific traits. Now, as she reflected on Timmy's behavior, a connection began to form. Could Timmy's refusal to wear his shoes be related to a sensory sensitivity? The thought resonated with her, offering a potential explanation for his seemingly irrational resistance. She pulled out her notes from the workshop, rereading the descriptions of various sensory processing challenges. She scanned the pages. She paid particular attention to tactile defensiveness, the aversion to certain textures and sensations against the skin. The more she read, the more convinced she became that this might be the key to unlocking Timmy's mystery. She decided to shift her focus, to observe Timmy more closely, not just in relation to his shoes, but in all aspects of his daily interactions in the classroom. She wanted to see if she could identify any other potential signs of sensory sensitivities. She made a mental note to pay attention to how Timmy reacted to different textures, both in his clothing and in the classroom materials. Did he avoid certain fabrics? Did he seem uncomfortable when playing with finger paints or sand? She also planned to observe his reactions to loud noises, bright lights, and strong smells. Did he seem easily overwhelmed or distressed by these stimuli? Mrs. Abigail knew that she wasn't a trained specialist, but she was confident that she could gather enough information to determine if Timmy might be experiencing a sensory processing issue. If her suspicions were confirmed, she could then reach out to the school psychologist or a qualified occupational therapist for further evaluation and support. For now, she would trust her instincts and focus on observing Timmy with a fresh perspective, hoping to finally understand the reason behind his persistent refusal to wear his shoes. The next few days were a revelation for Mrs. Abigail. Armed with her newfound awareness of sensory processing, she began to see Timmy in a completely different light. What she had previously interpreted as simple pickiness or shyness now seemed to fit a pattern of sensory sensitivities. During art time, Mrs. Abigail noticed that Timmy carefully avoided the finger paints, opting instead for crayons. When she offered him a piece of textured paper, he wrinkled his nose and politely declined, saying it felt scratchy. He preferred the smooth, cool surface of construction paper, carefully smoothing it out with his hands before he began to draw. Lunchtime in the cafeteria was another eye-opening experience. The cacophony of clanging trays, chattering voices, and echoing footsteps seemed to overwhelm Timmy. He covered his ears with his hands and winced, his face flushed with discomfort. He ate very little, picking at his food with a lack of appetite. Mrs. Abigail observed that he seemed much calmer and more relaxed when he was able to sit away from the crowd, near a quiet corner of the room. Circle time, usually a favorite activity for the children, presented another challenge for Timmy that he seemed uncomfortable being in such close proximity to his classmates. Often fidgeting and squirming, he would subtly inch away from the group, creating a small bubble of personal space around himself. Mrs. Abigail noticed that he seemed much more engaged when he was given a designated spot on the edge of the circle, where he had a clear view of the room and a sense of control over his surroundings. She also observed that Timmy was particularly sensitive to certain fabrics, that he seemed to prefer soft, loose-fitting clothing, avoiding anything that was tight, scratchy, or restrictive. She noticed him subtly adjusting his socks throughout the day, pulling them up or down, as if trying to find a more comfortable fit. These observations, combined with Timmy's persistent refusal to wear his shoes, painted a clear picture. For Mrs. Abigail, she was now convinced that Timmy was indeed experiencing heightened sensory sensitivities, and that these sensitivities were playing a significant role in his behavior. The question now was, how could she help him manage these sensitivities and create a more comfortable and supportive learning environment for him? Emboldened by her insights, Mrs. Abigail began to subtly transform her classroom into a more sensory-friendly environment. She started by dimming the overhead fluorescent lights, relying instead on natural light from the windows and a few strategically placed lamps. The softer lighting created a calmer, more inviting atmosphere, and she noticed that Timmy seemed less agitated and more focused. She also introduced a selection of fidget toys, small, tactile objects that children could manipulate with their hands to help them focus and regulate their emotions. There were smooth stones, textured balls, and small wooden puzzles. Timmy gravitated towards a small, bean-filled bag, which he would quietly squeeze and knead during circle time and other potentially stressful situations. Perhaps the most significant change was the creation of a quiet corner, a cozy space in the back of the classroom where children could retreat when they felt overwhelmed or needed a break. Mrs. Abigail furnished the corner with soft pillows, a comfortable beanbag chair, and a selection of calming books. She made it clear that the quiet corner was a safe space, a place where children could go to recharge and regroup without being disturbed. These subtle modifications had a noticeable impact on the overall classroom environment. The children seemed calmer, more focused, and more engaged. Timmy, in particular, showed a significant improvement in his overall behavior. He was less fidgety, less easily distracted, and less prone to emotional outbursts. He participated more actively in classroom activities and seemed more comfortable interacting with his classmates. However, despite these positive changes, the shoe situation remained stubbornly unresolved. Timmy still refused to put on his shoes each morning, and the daily struggle continued to cast a shadow. Over the start of the day, Mrs. Abigail felt a mixture of hope and frustration. She was encouraged by the progress she had made in addressing Timmy's sensory sensitivities, but she knew that she hadn't yet found the root cause of his specific aversion to shoes. She realized that she needed to dig deeper to understand exactly what it was about the shoes that was causing Timmy so much distress. Was it the texture of the material, the feeling of confinement, the pressure on his feet? She decided to try a new approach, to focus specifically on the shoes themselves and to try to elicit more information from Timmy about his experience. Perhaps, she thought, the answer was hidden in the details, waiting to be uncovered. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning, not long after Mrs. Davison's observation, which, thankfully, had passed without incident due to Timmy's relatively improved behavior. And Mrs. Abigail was sitting beside Timmy on the rug, the familiar blue sneakers resting between them. She had tried everything she could think of to encourage him, but he remained steadfast in his refusal. As she watched him, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. Timmy was constantly touching his socks, subtly tugging at them, and squirming in his seat. He wasn't just avoiding the shoes. He seemed acutely aware of something going on beneath the shoes. A spark of intuition flickered in Mrs. Abigail's mind. She decided to shift her questioning, to focus not on the shoes themselves, but on Timmy's experience of wearing them. She knew that young children often struggle to articulate their sensory experiences, so she needed to be careful and deliberate in her approach. "Timmy," she said gently, "I understand you don't want to put on your shoes. Can you tell me how they feel when you wear them? Not just that you don't like them, but how do they feel on your feet?" Timmy hesitated, his brow furrowed in concentration. He looked down at his socks, then back up at Mrs. Abigail, his eyes filled with a mixture of confusion and frustration. "I don't know," he mumbled. Mrs. Abigail persisted, using simple, concrete language. "Do they feel tight? Do they feel too big? Do they feel hot or cold? Do they feel bumpy or smooth?" She offered him a range of options, trying to help him pinpoint the specific sensation that was causing him distress. Timmy shook his head, his frustration growing. "I don't know those words," he said, his voice rising in pitch. Mrs. Abigail realized she needed to be even more specific to help him connect his physical sensations with descriptive language. "Okay," she said, taking a deep breath. "Close your eyes, Timmy, and just think about what your feet feel like when you put on your shoes. What do you notice?" She waited patiently, giving him time to process the question. After a long moment of silence, Timmy's eyes fluttered open. His face was a mixture of relief and apprehension, as if he had finally found the words but was afraid to speak them. He looked at Mrs. Abigail, his voice barely a whisper. It's the socks," he said, his gaze fixed on the floor. "The socks," Mrs. Abigail repeated gently, encouraging him to continue. "What about the socks, Timmy?" He squirmed again, tugging at his socks with his fingers. "The lines," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "The lines inside, they feel." He paused, searching for the right words. "They feel like bugs crawling." Mrs. Abigail's heart skipped a beat. Bugs crawling. That was it. That was the shocking, yet understated, reason behind Timmy's persistent refusal. The seams inside his socks, the seemingly insignificant lines of thread that most children wouldn't even notice, felt like tiny insects crawling on his feet, making the shoes unbearable. It wasn't the shoes themselves that were the problem, it was the socks. The sensory input from the seams was so intense, so overwhelming, that it triggered a visceral reaction in Timmy, making him feel anxious and uncomfortable. He lacked the vocabulary to fully articulate the sensation, to explain the specific texture and pressure that was causing him so much distress. All he could say was that it felt like bugs crawling. Mrs. Abigail felt a surge of empathy for Timmy. She imagined the constant, irritating sensation, the feeling of tiny creatures scurrying across his skin. It was no wonder he refused to wear his shoes. It was no wonder he had been so upset. She realized that the solution was incredibly simple, yet it had been hidden in plain sight all along. She just needed to find a way to eliminate the source of the irritation, to find socks that didn't have those bothersome seams. She knew that seamless socks existed, socks designed specifically for children with sensory sensitivities. She just needed to get her hands on a pair and see if they made a difference. The answer had been so simple, so obvious, yet it had taken weeks of observation, questioning, and patient persistence to finally uncover the truth. Bugs crawling, Mrs. Abigail repeated softly, her voice filled with understanding. "Oh, Timmy, that sounds awful. I can see why you don't want to wear your shoes if it feels like bugs are crawling on your feet." She validated his feelings, acknowledging the discomfort and distress he had been experiencing. It was important for Timmy to know that she believed him, that she understood his experience, even if she couldn't fully comprehend it. She then explained to Timmy that the issue wasn't the shoes themselves, but the socks and the resulting sensory overload. She used simple language to explain the concept of sensory sensitivity, telling him that some people's skin is more sensitive than others, and that the seams in his socks were causing him to feel uncomfortable. "It's not your fault, Timmy," she said reassuringly. "It's just that your feet are extra special and need extra special socks." With the mystery solved, Mrs. Abigail shifted her focus to finding a solution. She knew that seamless socks were available, but she didn't have any on hand. She brainstormed with Timmy, asking him what kind of socks he thought would feel better. "Maybe soft ones," Timmy suggested hesitantly. "Ones without lines." "Exactly," Mrs. Abigail exclaimed. "Soft ones without lines. That's a great idea." She explained that she would try to find some special socks that didn't have seams, socks that would feel smooth and comfortable on his feet. She considered her options. She could call Timmy's parents and ask them to buy seamless socks, but she knew that they had been dismissive of her concerns in the past. She didn't want to risk further delays or misunderstandings. She decided to take matters into her own hands. She remembered seeing a catalog for children with special needs in the school's resource room. She knew that these catalogs often carried adaptive clothing and accessories, including seamless socks. She resolved to check the catalog first thing in the morning and order a pair of seamless socks for Timmy. In the meantime, she needed a temporary solution to get Timmy through the day. She rummaged through her supply closet and found a pair of soft, fuzzy socks that she kept for emergencies. They weren't seamless, but they were made of a very fine, smooth material. She offered them to Timmy, explaining that they might feel a little better than his regular socks. Timmy hesitantly agreed to try them. He carefully pulled on the fuzzy socks, his expression cautious. He took a few tentative steps, then looked up at Mrs. Abigail with a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "They feel better," he said softly. "They don't have as many lines." The following week, a small, neatly wrapped package arrived at the school, addressed to Mrs. Abigail. Inside were 2 pairs of seamless socks, specially ordered from the children's resource catalog. They were a soft, creamy white, made of a smooth, stretchy material. Mrs. Abigail couldn't wait to see if they would make a difference. The next morning, Mrs. Abigail waited with bated breath as Timmy arrived. He seemed a little more hesitant than usual. Perhaps sensing that this day was different, Mrs. Abigail knelt down beside him, holding out the seamless socks with a hopeful smile. "Timmy," she said, I have a special surprise for you. Remember how we talked about the lines in your socks feeling like bugs crawling? Well, I found some socks that don't have any lines at all. They're called seamless socks, and they're supposed to feel very smooth and comfortable. Timmy looked at the socks with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension that he reached out tentatively and touched the soft fabric, his expression thoughtful. "No lines?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "No lines," Mrs. Abigail confirmed. "See, they're completely smooth inside." She turned one of the socks inside out to show him the lack of seams. Timmy hesitated for a moment, then slowly began to pull off his old socks, and Mrs. Abigail watched him carefully, her heart pounding with anticipation. He carefully slipped on the new seamless socks, smoothing them out with his hands. He wiggled his toes, his expression unreadable. Mrs. Abigail held her breath. "How do they feel, Timmy?" she asked softly. Timmy paused, concentrating on the sensation that a slow smile spread across his face. "They feel good," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "They don't feel like bugs." With a newfound confidence, he reached for his blue sneakers. He hesitated for just a moment, then slipped them on. Mrs. Abigail watched, her eyes brimming with tears, and then it happened. Timmy stood up, took a few steps, and grinned. "I can wear my shoes," he exclaimed, his voice filled with joy. He ran around the rug, showing off his shoes to the other children, who cheered and clapped. The daily battle was finally over. The simple act of putting on his shoes had been transformed from a source of anxiety and distress into a moment of triumph and joy. The transformation in Timmy was remarkable. With the simple switch to seamless socks, his overall behavior improved dramatically. The daily meltdowns disappeared, replaced by a newfound sense of confidence and ease. He participated more actively in class, his attention span increased, and he seemed genuinely happier and more engaged. The positive ripple effect extended throughout the classroom, creating a more harmonious and productive learning environment for everyone. Emboldened by her success, Mrs. Abigail reached out to Timmy's parents again, this time with a much more confident and assertive tone. She shared her discovery about Timmy's sensory sensitivity and explained the impact of the seamless socks. To her surprise, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson were much more receptive to her concerns. They had noticed the positive changes in Timmy's behavior and were now willing to listen and learn. Mrs. Abigail explained the importance of providing Timmy with sensory-friendly clothing and creating a more supportive environment at home. She shared resources and information about sensory processing disorder, helping them to understand the challenges that Timmy faced. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson were deeply grateful for her insights and apologized for their initial dismissiveness. They vowed to be more proactive in supporting Timmy's needs and working with Mrs. Abigail to create a consistent and supportive approach both at home and at school. Mrs. Abigail reflected on the entire experience. She realized the profound importance of empathy, observation, and understanding individual needs in education. She had initially been frustrated and overwhelmed by Timmy's behavior, but by shifting her perspective and focusing on his individual needs, she had been able to unlock the mystery and find a simple solution. She learned that every child is unique and that what works for one child may not work for another. She realized that it was her responsibility as an educator to look beyond the surface, to dig deeper, and to understand the underlying reasons behind a child's behavior. She also learned the importance of trusting her instincts and advocating for her students, even when faced with resistance or skepticism. The experience with Timmy had transformed Mrs. Abigail as an educator. She was now more attuned to the subtle cues and signals that children often use to communicate their needs. She was more patient, more empathetic, and more committed than ever to creating a truly inclusive and supportive learning environment for all her students. She knew that the journey of understanding and supporting each child would be ongoing, but she was now better equipped and more inspired than ever to embrace the challenge. Timmy's story serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of patience and understanding when dealing with children's seemingly irrational behaviors. What may appear to be simple stubbornness or defiance can often be a manifestation of deeper, underlying issues, often related to hidden sensitivities that we, as adults, may not readily perceive. IT highlights the critical role of educators and caregivers in creating a safe and supportive environment where children feel comfortable expressing their needs and concerns. By taking the time to observe, listen, and empathize, we can unlock the mysteries behind their behaviors and find solutions that address their individual needs. The case of Timmy and his bug crawling socks underscores the power of simple solutions. Sometimes, the answer to a complex problem is surprisingly straightforward. In this instance, a simple switch to seamless socks transformed Timmy's life, alleviating his anxiety and allowing him to fully participate in the joys of childhood. This story also emphasizes the importance of trusting our instincts and advocating for children, even when faced with skepticism or resistance from others. And Mrs. Abigail's unwavering commitment to understanding Timmy's behavior, despite the initial dismissiveness of his parents, ultimately led to a positive outcome for everyone involved. Let us remember that every child is unique, with their own individual strengths, challenges, and sensitivities. By embracing this diversity and approaching each child with empathy and understanding, we can create a world where all children feel supported, valued, and empowered to reach their full potential. And finally, let us not underestimate the power of a simple act of kindness. Mrs. Abigail's willingness to go the extra mile, to order those special seamless socks, made all the difference in Timmy's life. It is a testament to the profound impact that a caring and dedicated educator can have on a child's well-being and development. So, the next time you encounter a child who is struggling, remember Timmy's story. Remember the importance of patience, understanding, and the power of simple solutions. And remember that even the smallest act of kindness can make a world of difference.